Hello, so welcome to part 19 of toxin sequestration theory. This is my new theory of cancer. I'm very excited about it because it gives a completely different perspective on tumors. It argues that tumors are intentionally built by the body to sequester and store toxins in order to protect the healthy tissue. After all, the body has to protect its vital organs from toxins because toxins are the primary cause of every disease. So it uses extra tissue in the form of tumors to pull toxins away from the healthy tissue in order to protect its organs. And I just mentioned that this theory was featured on the cover of the Masters of Health magazine in the past few weeks, so I'm very excited about that. I'm doing interviews, and so you can see some of those interviews online. So definitely this theory is getting attention. I'm 100% convinced that the theory is correct, which raises some very serious concerns about how it's being treated in the mainstream, to say the least. So in any case, more recently, I've extended beyond cancer to other types of extra tissue the body builds. And let's think of other situations where the body builds extra tissue. One is obesity. So it builds fat tissue for the exact same reason. And many people think that the body builds fat just to store energy. No, it's building fat to store fat-soluble toxins, things like seed oils, microplastics, heavy metals, and forever chemicals, as well as xenoestrogens, BPA, phthalates. And so it's storing all these toxins which we're constantly exposed to in fat tissue. And that is a key reason why people have obesity. It's basically the body protecting its vital organs from toxins. And even more recently, I've extended this to skin growths. And this is my Substack post that was the most popular out of all my blog posts, I guess because everyone has skin growths. We've all had pimples and skin tags and lipomas and those kind of things. So personally I have a lipoma right now, and I've always wondered what the heck was in a lipoma. Well, guess what? It's storing the lipophilic toxins. It's full of seed oils, it's full of microplastics and forever chemicals and other things. So and we can view skin growths as part of a hierarchical strategy that the body uses to sequester toxins. Its first preferred method typically would be to create fat tissue, and that's why whenever we first eat food, the first that's toxic, the first thing that happens is we gain some extra fat tissue. So that's its first primary strategy. So when you eat a whole bunch of seed oils, then the first thing that's going to happen is your body will build extra fat tissue to store those seed oils. And then the next strategy will be building the skin growths. So, and of course, some skin growths are more aggressive than others. Obviously, pimples are very small and localized, so that's sort of a first-tier strategy, whereas lipomas are larger, longer-term storage vaults, so that's a more aggressive strategy. And, in my previous video, I talked about these different skin growths and how they store toxins, and in today's video, I'm going to extend it to even more skin growths. I'm going to talk about pigment-based skin growths, so things like moles and age spots. And I certainly have my share of moles on my body. I can show you some on my arms. And no one really explained that. Imagine we live our whole lives and no one ever explains to us why do we have moles on our skin. And sometimes people connect it to, say, sunlight exposure, and that is part of it, but it's not the key issue. The key issue is that we are exposed to toxins, and moles store toxins. Now, what are the toxins that moles store? Well, that is where things get really interesting, because they are specifically designed to store toxic metals. I've talked in one of my previous videos about some of the toxic metals we're exposed to. Now, of course, the first thing that comes to mind are the heavy metals, things like mercury, cadmium, lead, arsenic, and all those heavy metals, nickel. But I've also talked about things like excess copper and excess iron. And of course, copper and iron both play a physiological role in the body, but we are inundated in today's world with excess copper and excess iron, and especially when it comes to iron, it's the non-heme iron that's the problem. So that's the iron that's found in plant-based foods as well as fortified foods. So in other words, that's metal iron, not the sort of iron found in red meat. Okay, so many of us have too much copper, too much iron, and also all these heavy metals. And those, by the way, the sweat, whenever you sweat out of your skin, sweat is concentrated in toxic metals. So when we do sweat, and you can kind of view it as the body trying to push those toxic metals out through the skin in the form of sweat, but then nevertheless those metals will sit on the surface of the skin, and so the body might not want to reabsorb those toxic metals. So moles are a great way to concentrate and sequester those toxic metals. Now, interestingly, the star player, the star of the story is melanin. Melanin, as you know, is a pigment that's in the skin, and that is what's in moles. Melanin is a chemical that is a chelator for toxic metals. So a chelator is basically a chemical that binds very strongly to a mineral, and in this case, melanin binds very strongly to all the toxic metals. It binds strongly to copper, to iron, to all the heavy metals that I mentioned. And so you can view a mole as basically a melanin chelated storage vault for where it's chelating all these metals and like storing them very strongly. That's consistent with the fact that people with higher toxic loads, especially from environmental metals or dietary metals, those people often develop more moles over time. And then interestingly, moles tend to appear or darken during periods of increased oxidative stress, whenever people are full of stress. And they also suddenly increase, like moles tend to increase whenever the body is working hard to sequester metals and other toxins. So we should not view moles as a random skin defect. They are an intelligent strategy. The body is intelligently trying to sequester and store these toxic metals so that they don't damage the rest of the body. Because if these metals do roam freely, guess what all those metals cause? They cause neurodegenerative conditions. They cause Alzheimer's. They cause autism. They cause infertility, and they cause all sorts of health problems. They cause hypothyroid. They damage your thyroid. So the body can't let those metals roam freely. It also raises the question of what you should do about moles. It is sometimes common, every once in a while, people will have a mole surgically removed, but there are risks of having it surgically removed because if the surgery isn't exactly perfect, it could release stored toxins, these heavy metals, toxic metals, back into the surrounding tissue or back into the bloodstream. And that could force the body to escalate its strategy and form a new vault. It could lead to a cancer tumor, for example, if the body says, oh, now I have all this excess metals floating around. And of course, it can create unnecessary scarring and local trauma as well to the skin tissue. Instead, the wise strategy is to lower your toxic burden to metals. And I've talked about in my videos how you can do that. I've talked about how cutting out plant-based foods, because plant-based foods are high in toxic metals. They're high in copper, they're high in non-heme iron, and they're high in nickel, and they're high in the heavy metals as well. So reducing your exposure to toxic metals should reduce the need for moles in the first place. And also some people will take note that moles can change their shape and sometimes say that whenever a mole is changing, that could mean that it's becoming precancerous. And but in my theory, moles are part of a continuum that involves cancer as well. So it is not a surprise that some moles could turn cancerous, because that's just the body escalating its strategy. It could mean that the toxic load is increasing and the body needs more storage space beyond just what the mole can offer. And so a cancer tumor could be the next escalation beyond a mole. So, but my theory says not to be alarmed about that, because in my theory, cancer tumors are not a disease. They are a storage vault. So, so it makes sense there to not be incredibly alarmed if you have a mole that is changing its shape or its appearance. And you know, of course, that contradicts with the mainstream, because the mainstream will tell you to be absolutely paranoid if you have a mole that's changing in some way. But my theory is different from the mainstream. Now, what about age spots? Age spots are similar to moles. They're sort of brown, but they're more flat. They're more like flat brown, sort of pigment-based growths. And so these age spots are basically the exact same thing as moles. They do the same thing. They store the toxic metals. They store copper. They store iron, and they store the heavy metals. And they once again use melanin as well. They're just a different shape. So you can think of age spots as just being a different shape as moles, but they have the exact same purpose. And you know, it is true that sun exposure can accelerate the appearance of these age spots, but that's just because the UV light from the sun acts as an additional source of local oxidative stress on the body. And I've talked about how the sun is not the enemy, but in today's modern world, where many of us have been exposed to seed oils, for example, the seed oils basically sensitize your skin to sunlight. And there's other plant defense chemicals that also act as photosensitizers. So, you know, you can get more oxidative stress from sunlight exposure if you have these dietary factors like seed oils and plant defense chemicals. So the idea is that, you know, really what triggers the formation of a skin vault, just like a cancer tumor, is the local oxidative stress level. So it's a combination of the toxic metals as well as, you know, the oxidative stress from the UV light as well. All right, so, and there's other types of pigment-based vaults. There's something called dermatosis papulosa nigra, and these are commonly on the skin of people who have darker skin. So for example, Morgan Freeman, who's the famous actor, he is well known for having this on his skin. There's also something called melasma, which is another facial pigmentation-based vault. So all of these can be viewed as pigment-based vaults that are largely meant to sequester the toxic metals. Yeah, so that basically wraps up our discussion of pigment-based vaults. Now, I will mention another skin vault, which is called a sebaceous cyst. So, because I didn't get a chance to cover it in my last video, but sebaceous cysts are, of course, skin vaults. And I think I did have one cyst in my life before. And they are actually not pigment-based vaults. They're much more similar to lipomas and pimples. They are actually lipid-based sequestration vaults. So you recall from my previous video, I've talked about lipomas and pimples, and they store oxidized seed oils, forever chemicals, microplastics, xenoestrogens like BPA and phthalates, as well as the heavy metals. And sebaceous cysts are exactly the same. Those are the toxins that they store, and you know, they prevent the toxins from circulating around by isolating them in these storage vaults, and they also contain lipid droplets inside of them. So they fit in perfectly. They're very similar, like I said, to lipomas and pimples in that respect. So we just add another storage vault to the list there. And now we're in the position to talk about what I call the toxin-to-skin growth mapping. And so you remember when I've talked about cancer, I've talked about the toxin-to-organ mapping, where certain toxins drive cancer tumors in specific organs. So for example, I've talked about how excess estrogen and oxalates drive cancer tumors in the breast tissue for women. But the toxin to skin growth mapping will tell us what toxins drive specific skin growths. And I love this because it gives people agency. It says, okay, well, if you look at your skin, which is a visible sign of toxicity, and you find a particular skin growth, then you can take that as a sign that you have a particular toxicity. And I've already talked about how moles and age spots are a sign that you have too much toxic metals in your body. You have too much copper, non-heme iron, and heavy metals. So take it as a warning sign. If you have moles on your body, that you need to reduce your metal exposure. And then similarly, I also mentioned the cysts, so the sebaceous cysts. Then you should take, if you have a cyst, you should take it as a warning sign that you have too much seed oils, forever chemicals, microplastics, and phthalates. And then for pimples, the two primary ones are, once again, seed oils. It's seed oils keep appearing, but seed oils for pimples, as well as sort of glucotoxicity spillover from too much sugar, fructose and glucose. And then for lipomas, it is the seed oils again, it's the forever chemicals, as well as excess copper. That's what's stored in the lipomas. And for the cherry angiomas, which are these vascular vaults, and I've talked about them before, they store the xenoestrogens, so the BPA and the phthalates, as well as excess estrogen as well. So if you just have too much estrogen in your body, and they also store copper. And then finally, for the skin tags, these are little flaps that grow on your skin. The skin tags store excess estrogen, xenoestrogens, the BPA and the phthalates, as well as excess copper and glucotoxicity spillover, so sort of excess oxidative stress, damaged biomolecules from too much sugar. So that's the toxin to organ mapping. That's the toxin to skin growth mapping. And I love it because it allows you to look at the skin growths that you have and basically self-diagnose your toxicity. You can say, like for me, I can look at the lipoma that I had on my body, and I still have it, and say that, well, I exposed myself to too much seed oils, too much copper, too much forever chemicals, etc. And fortunately, I've solved that problem because I'm on a strict carnivore diet, which eliminates several of these things. But this gives you power to diagnose your own toxicity just by looking at your skin growths. And it's also more exciting because the skin growths are more visible than cancer tumors are. And so, and of course, skin growths can be a precursor to getting a cancer tumor because they are tier 2, whereas cancer tumors are tier 3 in my hierarchy. And so if you are looking to prevent the body from escalating its strategy to a cancer tumor, then you can kind of preemptively lower your toxicity based on your skin growths. So in that sense, we can use skin growths to prevent something more aggressive, something more serious. So I find that very exciting because it really gives you agency to diagnose your own toxicities. And then, let's just remark, of course, why is it that skin growths are so common? Well, what is the number one cancer in the world? It's skin cancer. And I've argued in the past that the reason skin cancer is so common is because the skin is the most peripheral tissue in the body. It is the farthest away from the vital organs. So naturally, it is the perfect place to build a storage vault for toxins because it isolates the toxins away from the vital organs. And then similarly, it's also exposed to the outside world. It's sort of the interface with the outside world. So in that sense, both from the outside in, if you want to prevent the toxins from getting into your body, that's a good place to store them. And also, if you want to try to excrete toxins out of your body, say through pimples, it's a good place to make a vault because people can pop their pimples and then release the toxins back into the outside world. So that's the idea. And I think I've basically wrapped up the story around skin vaults. Let me know your questions and thoughts. What do you think about these skin growths? Thanks very much for listening.